Hello everyone, welcome to the stream. My name is Garrett Schneck and I am one of the co-captains of Robotics. I hope you are safe and in good health during this pandemic. Today is day one of our industry professionals panel, and I hope you're excited to see the wonderful people we have here today. But first, to give you some background, we are an FRC team based in Long Beach, California at Polytechnic High School. With the 2021 season being our fourth year as a group, our team consists of around 35 student members and 5 experienced mentors from the greater Los Angeles area. During our years as a team, we have sent a robot to the Del Mar Regional, LA, and OC Regionals, and the World Championships in Houston. The team has also been recognized with the Rookie Inspiration Award and Judges Award, and as an outstanding STEM program by the Orange County Engineering Council. We have a mission to enable students of all backgrounds to enthusiastically explore the various fields of STEM, while equipping them with the skills needed to succeed later in life. We take pride in providing a diverse, inclusive, and equitable environment for members to thrive. Now let's get back on track, because today you are here to listen to how professionals in the industry use STEM in the environment, not me. Let me pass the mic over to our host for the night, Hanana Kanza.
Thank you, Garrett. Hello and welcome to Rabbotics FRC Team 7042's Industry Professional Panel with the theme STEM in the Environment. My name is Anana Kanza and I will be your host and moderator tonight. Before we get started, I'm going to go over the schedule that we have planned for this event. So first, each panelist will get 20 minutes to present and talk about their job. After that, we are going to open our YouTube chat for Q&As. I will be monitoring the chat for any questions that come, and I will be asking them to our panelists. Please note that we have allotted some extra time during this career panel, and this is to accommodate for any questions that you, our audience, may have, and also for any unforeseen technical difficulties, which we will hopefully be avoiding today. So without much further ado, let me introduce to you our first panelist. Our first panelist is Dr. Rebecca Hutchinson, assistant professor at Oregon State, and she works in computer science related to ecology. Dr. Hutchinson conducts research that develops machine learning methods for ecological problems, like species distribution modeling and link predictions for species interactions. She's also an avid supporter of computer science education in public schools. So please welcome Dr. Hutchinson.
Hello. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for the kind introduction. I'll share my screen here. Okay. So I'll start by introducing myself a little bit. So I went to high school in Green Bay, Wisconsin, home of the Green Bay Packers. And in high school, I was not in a robotics club. I focused a lot on music, actually, a lot of band time. And then went from high school to college at Bucknell University, which is a small school in central Pennsylvania. I didn't know that I wanted to study computer science when I got there. That was something I found in my freshman year. I had not taken any computer science courses before then. And I got a bachelor's of science in engineering in computer science, and then went straight into a PhD program at Carnegie Mellon University. There I studied machine learning applied to brain imaging analysis. And when I got my PhD in 2009, I decided to switch gears a little bit, and I got a postdoc at Oregon State University. A postdoc is kind of like an apprenticeship. So it's not an additional degree like a PhD is. It's just some extra time that you can spend studying. So it's a job, but it's sort of an educational job, and it's a temporary job. These things are for a few years. So I did that for a bit, and then I found so the switching gears piece was that I started working on machine learning for problems in ecology instead of brain imaging. So I was doing this interdisciplinary thing between computer science and ecology. And then in 2015, they were advertising for joint appointments between a quantitative science field and a life science field. and I was hired as an assistant professor, which is just what basically a professor is called at the first level of being a professor. And my appointment is 70% in computer science and 30% in fisheries and wildlife. And I am most of the way toward a decision about tenure. And tenure is basically when the university makes, they evaluate what you've done in your first time at the university, and then make a decision about whether they're willing to invest in you long-term. And basically it's amazing job security, or if basically you're going to get fired. So hoping for the best there, of course. So that's kind of my academic trajectory, but that's not all of me. I also, during grad school, during my PhD program, I got married and we got a couple of dogs. And then shortly after I was hired as a professor, I had a kiddo, and we also got a puppy. And then a bit later, we had another kid. So I have a family life as well as my professional life. And I have some hobbies too. I do like to get out into the garden, and I like knitting too. And these slippers are one of my favorite things that I've made. So I thought I'd share those things with you as well. So that's a little bit about me. And I thought I'd tell you a little bit about my job too. So I'm a professor, and professor jobs are typically broken down into these three bins: research in blue, teaching in orange, and service in gray. And so these are the percentages for my job right now. So half research, and then some teaching and service. But different professors at different universities and colleges have different breakdowns of these types of work. So some people are almost all blue, some people are almost all orange. It varies. I teach these three classes each year. A class very related to my research called Machine Learning Topics in Species Distribution Modeling. That's for grad students. And then two classes for undergrads. One is an Introduction to Artificial Intelligence, and another is a new critical thinking class. And in terms of my research, a succinct statement is my team develops machine learning models and algorithms inspired by problems and data in ecology and conservation. And so today I'm going to tell you a little bit about my inspiration, and then just highlight very briefly a few of the problems that we're working on. I won't really tell you that much about how we're solving them, but just to give you an idea of the kind of problems that we work on. So the inspiration, of course, is that scientists think that we're in the 6th major mass extinction that our planet has experienced, which is a sad thing. And so I would like to help out with doing whatever I can to help conserve biodiversity. And so what we're getting at here is basically, okay, well, that kind of sounds like a biology or ecology type of question, but how can computer science fit in with that motivation? Well, one way is that in order to conserve species, we need good models of them to understand what types of actions that we could take to try to help might be effective. And those models are called species distribution models, among other things. This is one piece of the puzzle. So I have a couple of examples here to give you an idea of what a species distribution model is. So on the left, there is a fissure, and the maps below it are the output of a species distribution model. So what we have over here, this is a part of Oregon. The red part is I-5, so California is down below here. And these hatched areas are historical distributions of fissures. And then we're asking, well, okay, if we know that they used to be in these places and then could have expanded their populations, where might they be now, or where might they persist? And so this one on the right is showing the more green the area, the more likely it is that that area is suitable for fissures. And then over on the right, we have a similar thing for these two birds, an olive-sided flycatcher and a Pacific slope flycatcher. These maps are for 1995 and 2005 for small segments of Western Oregon. And again, the lighter colors represent a higher likelihood that the species might be there or could persist there. So again, imagine that if you are trying to manage for one of these species, You might be thinking about, well, should I buy a piece of land over here to set up a reserve, or should I buy a piece of land over here? Models like this can help inform a decision like that. So how do we build models? Well, one thing we need is data. And one opportunity for data is community science. So anybody who enjoys birding can get the eBird app on their phone and go out and make bird observations and report what you saw. You use the GPS to let it know where you were. And all of those observations go back to a database at Cornell University. So this is an example for this indigo bunting. Data have been collected all over the country. The red dots are where the indigo bunting was observed, and the gray ones are places that people did go birding, but they didn't see this indigo bunting species. So this is great because we can accumulate data at broad scales, and it comes together in a table that looks something like this. So when we build a species distribution model, our task is to estimate a function, that's the model, a function, from some environmental variables to the occurrence of the species. So based on that map, we would have a whole bunch of sites. We saw way more than 3. And the red ones would be the yeses, and the gray ones would be the nos. And each of those points also has environmental characteristics, like elevation and precipitation. Actually, it's many more than that, right? These are just 2, this is a small example to illustrate. And so what we would like to do is come up with some function f that would take as input the environmental characteristics and output the probability that the species might be there. Okay, and so this is what we do with machine learning. We take a bunch of data and we use it, we put it into an algorithm, and that algorithm gives us a function. And then when we give new data to that function about an environmental characteristic, it can give us out the probability that the species was there. Okay, so that's kind of a general overview, and I'm going to jump into really brief descriptions of 4 projects that my students are working on. So the first project is one that my student Laurel Hopkins is working on, and this is Laurel and her dog Cosmo up in the right hand side picture there. And so what she's thinking about is we have all these species records. This is in Oregon now from eBird. But when people go birding at these different locations, they report the birds they saw, but they don't actually measure elevation and precipitation or other aspects of the site. So she's asking, well, could we use satellite images instead to tell us about the environment at these points as input for a species distribution model? So that would look like this. We have all these points with bird data, and then we have satellite images that we can grab for each one of those points. Those things together would go into the model to build that function f, which could then make predictions about what species we might see at those sites. And so what Laurel's working on is, okay, yes, we have freely available satellite data. We can go grab these images, but now how should we summarize these images to go into the model? These are, maybe many pixels, each pixel represented by 3 numbers or maybe more if we're using Landsat satellites. So that's a lot of numbers basically for each image. How should we summarize those numbers into something concise that can go into our model and be useful? Here's another problem that we think a lot about in my work and my team's work: imperfect detection. So this is a picture, there's a forest somewhere. You could imagine somebody going out and going birding here, looking around for all the birds, listening for birds, maybe even more than looking for them. And it's easy, I think, to imagine that you could be out at a site like this and certainly not see everything that's there, right? Not hear everything that's there. There could be birds in those trees that are not singing, not moving around, and you just miss them. For example, I bet many of you have not noticed that there's an ocelot in this picture peeking out between these branches. It's an example of imperfect detection. So what can we do about this? So here's another picture of a forest. And one thing we can do is get multiple observations at a site. So maybe we go out on one day and we look for some bird and we don't see it. Maybe we go out again, maybe we still don't see it. Go a third time, and now maybe we see this western tanager, or maybe we hear it. If we're willing to assume that the species was there the whole time, now we can say, okay, we're only detecting the species about 1/3 of the time. That's the kind of inference that we can make from multiple visits. The problem when we use the eBird data is that these might actually come from different people, and they might even not be at exactly the same location. So if the data isn't set up this way with multiple visits to deal with imperfect detection, could we, what could we do? So this is what my student Mark Roth is thinking about. These checklists are all coming in as kind of separate locations, but we'd like to group them up so that we can deal with imperfect detection. So we're trying to design an algorithm that creates groups or sites that are ecologically feasible, contain similar checklists, and improve the accuracy of our models. And what this is showing, this picture is showing, is that some of the existing techniques are not doing as well as we'd like. So the orange technique puts these two together. Those are geographically close to each other, but they're not environmentally similar, right? This is up on top of a cliff. This is at the bottom of a cliff, different elevation, for example. The pink technique puts these two together. Those look like they are similar habitat, but they're geographically far from each other. We don't think that we'd be able to maybe hear the same birds at those locations. So we're trying to come up with a better way to group checklists into sites. Another student is working on model evaluation and validation. So if this is the machine learning cycle here, we've talked a little bit about data collection with eBird and a little bit about data preparation, grouping things into sites and matching them up with satellite imagery. Another thing we want to do is model evaluation and training and validation. So what we usually do is take our data set and use about 75% of it to build our model, train our function F. We use a little bit more of it to do any tweaks that we need to do to that function. And then we hold out some of it that the model has never seen. And we give it that new test data and ask how well it can predict the birds that were in the test data, for example. And that's how we know how good our model is. Okay, but the data we're talking about is spatial. And spatial data has autocorrelation. So you can see in this plot of precipitation over the US, autocorrelation just means that points that are closer together have more similar values. And you see how the colors clump up, right? Same thing in the bird data. The presences, the places where the indigo bunting was present, are close to each other compared to the ones where it was absent. Well, when we think about splitting up this data into data for training and data for testing, the fact that there's autocorrelation here could be a problem for us. If you think about, this is a new example now, look at Oregon, and imagine that the blue points are the points that we're using to train our model, and the red points are the points that we're using to test it. Well, any place that we have a red point very, very close to a blue point, and we have a lot of those, right? We might get an optimistic estimate of how good our model is because we're testing on a point that is so close to the training point. Well, one thing we could do to try to avoid that, that's the high spatial autocorrelation. We could split the state in half. Okay, so there won't be very many blue points close to red points if we do it that way. We could train on these blue points and test on the red. But here we have high extrapolation. That means that we're training, in this case for Oregon, this is high desert over here. And over here we have some temperate rainforest. We don't expect that the model that's trained in high desert is going to do well in temperate rainforest. So here we have high extrapolation, which is a problem. So maybe there are some intermediate solutions like checkerboards, where we could train on the blue, if this is just a 2x2 checkerboard, and test on the red. And that seems like a little bit better solution. You could think about 4x4, 8x8, and so on. So the question that my student Jing Wang is asking is, well, how could we split spatial data to achieve unbiased prediction error in model evaluation? How should we split these into training and test points so we get a really good estimate of how good our model is? And the final project that I'll mention is about interaction networks. So this is a beautiful meadow up at the research forest that Oregon State runs. And the flowers are blooming in this meadow and the pollinators are out. And this is an REU student. We had a bunch of students in this program. This is a summer program REU stands for Research Experiences for Undergraduates. And those of you that might be headed to college might be interested in this. If you're interested in a path like I've taken, and trying out some research, REU programs are a great way to do that. And they're kind of like summer internships. So you could keep an eye out for those types of things. So these students went out and they recorded every species of pollinator that they saw go to every species of flower. So this is one kind of bee going to one kind of flower, and another set, and another set. Oops. And those interactions form a network. So if you line up all the pollinators on the top here and all the plants on the bottom, and this is a very small subset, we had hundreds of these, then you could connect them where the width of the connection indicates how often that connection was observed. So this one, these only interacted with each other and they didn't interact very much at all. On the other hand, this one and this one interacted a lot, but they also interacted with quite a few others. What ecologists want to know is how robust are these networks? If one species goes extinct, are other species going to go extinct? If you see a lot of connections like this, maybe so. If this pollinator goes away, maybe this plant can't survive. If you see a lot of connections like this, maybe it's more robust. But these networks are subject to imperfect detection too, right? This person out in the field, they're probably not seeing every single link that's going on, right? So we are thinking about ways to try to understand which links might have happened even though we didn't observe them. So, could this butterfly have come to this plant as well? And some of the techniques that we're using to do that are inspired by Netflix. So Netflix makes networks too. They have users and movies. And when a person comes to Netflix and thinks, which movie should I watch? Netflix is asking, well, based on the other users that were like you, which of these movies that you haven't watched yet should we recommend? So we would like to conceptually think of a bee coming to a meadow and think, well, based on what flowers you've gone to and which other pollinators go to those flowers, maybe you would like this flower. So that's a little bit of an oversimplification in the analogy, but that is kind of the foundation of the ideas that my student Eugene So is working on. So that's a fun project as well. So that's been a really quick whirlwind overview of 4 projects and some general inspiration for how computer science and conservation can come together. And that's been about 20 minutes. So I'd like to go ahead and switch over to Q&A with you all now, with a quick thanks to my wonderful students, Laurel, Mark, Eugene, and Jing, and also welcome your emails if you'd like to follow up in that way.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Hutchinson, for this very informative presentation. Now we will open up the chat on YouTube for any questions that you may have. So while you guys write down those questions, we're going to go into some questions that we got from our survey that a team asked. So our first question is, what does a normal workday look like for you?
Normal during COVID or normal not during COVID? Maybe I can speak a little bit more to a work week. It depends a little bit whether I'm teaching or not. Right now I'm not teaching. Next quarter, I'll be teaching 2 classes. So my courses sometimes anchor my schedule. And that comes with course prep as well. I have 3 PhD students, 2 master's students, and 1 undergraduate working in my lab right now. And I have meetings with them each week, which we check in on their research progress and what kind of questions they have. Yeah, so those are some of the, and this job also comes with faculty meetings and some committee meetings and administrative things like that. But another thing that's important in my job is to make sure that I'm carving out time regularly in my work week to do writing. An academic job is actually a lot about writing papers, writing grant proposals, communicating your science to the world. So that's another big piece of my job. And maybe another thing to mention is that this is one of those jobs that has some flexibility in terms of when I do my work. I get to set a good bit of my schedule, not entirely when I teach, although I have some input into that. But if I have a day that I need to take my kid to the doctor, I can just do that. I don't have to ask anybody about that. And I can, work after he goes to bed or something like that. So that flexibility is really nice. The flip side of it is that the work is never done. And so if you don't sort of take charge of your work-life balance, you could easily spend all your time working. So.
All right, thank you. I didn't think that science would have so much writing involved, but that's really cool. Now we have a question from our audience. This is from username DDBDBDDC. I apologize if I mispronounce any usernames in advance, but they are asking is it possible that micro cameras stuck on pollinators will eventually solve some of the imperfect detection that you mentioned in your presentation?
I do think that new data collection modalities will have an impact on imperfect detection for a variety of taxa. I think that we're getting close to being able to put equipment on some bees, like bumblebees are a little bit larger, but some of them are quite small, and it will be a long time before we can get something attached to them, if at all. There are some people putting cameras in front of flowers, so then you can just take a video of everybody that comes to that flower. The limitation there is how many cameras can you put out. So there is potential for some improvement there. Depends how much sampling you can do that way. And similarly, people are putting audio recorders out in forests to detect bird song. And that's another whole slew of machine learning problems that come with that. So I think that some of these can have some impact. And one thing I wonder about is what other challenges will come up with those technologies that we then could use machine learning to solve.
Let's see. We have another question from our audience, and this is from Teresa. And she's asking, how did you know that this was the right job for you?
That's a good question. I knew that, broadly in my path, when I came to the end of my PhD, I'd had a great experience, I had a great advisor, but I was really feeling like I wanted to align my training and my passion for sustainability. So that was getting into the postdoc. And in the postdoc, I kind of got to try that out and get some new experience. And so I tried it and I liked it. So that was part of it. And then postdocs are this temporary apprenticeship. So I kind of had to think about, well, what comes after that? And it really seemed serendipitous that the place that I was advertising for an interdisciplinary position at the time that I was looking. So that was kind of amazing. Another thing that I like about this is I like the teaching. I like the mentoring. I like the research and the academic freedom of getting to work on what I want to work on. So all of those elements together, I guess kind of made it work out.
I see. That's a really nice story. And it just shows that you don't have to figure out everything directly out of high school. It's many.
I really like that point, actually. My path was fairly linear, starting from my freshman year of college, but I really don't think it has to be that way. And I think there are advantages to stepping off of a linear path too. I think it's fine to take a gap. Take a gap year and try something, get a job, and then go back to school. Like those steps might help you refine what you're really passionate about, and those are good things. So just because my path was linear doesn't mean that that's the only way to do it.
I see. Now, this is back to one of the questions that we have surveyed before. And this is what high school classes would be relevant to the type of classes that you teach and the research for those who have a very clear idea on what they want to do.
Yeah. I would say going back into both undergrad and beyond, computer science classes obviously are relevant, but I would say math is also a big thing in machine learning. I actually feel like, as an undergrad, I majored in computer science through the engineering college and got a Bachelor of Science in engineering. If I had it to do over again, I might be in the College of Science and double major between computer science and math instead, because there's so much math in, well, not all of machine learning, but it's valuable to have a lot of math. And math can be a thing that it's harder to learn on your own. There's also a lot of learning on your own. Okay, here's a new thing that just came out. You need to learn about it, right? So that skill is good. Yeah, but how about computer science and math, and maybe some writing, and things that you think are fun?
Yeah, the last part's really important, especially for those who are really stressing out about taking all the AP classes. Now we have another question from our chat. This is from Don, and he's asking how machine learning can apply to other fields besides ecology.
Yeah, I mean, machine learning is quite broadly applicable. I gave my examples within ecology, but machine learning is about taking data and building programs that can improve with experience. And experience sometimes means data. So that if you give it more and more and more data, it gets better and better and better by fitting the relationship between the inputs and the outputs more strongly, more accurately. So that can work for, I had the example about Netflix in there, which is a totally different thing. And so some of these like network techniques, recommendation systems show up for Netflix or Amazon, recommending products, or social networks like Facebook and Twitter. There are similar techniques over there. But basically anything where you are trying to make a prediction. So within sort of sustainability type of questions, there's this field of computational sustainability that what I've talked about is kind of a subset of. And so this is basically just what are all the ways that computer science could make a difference in our quest to be a more sustainable society. So there's also problems in design of new materials and smart grids and energy disaggregation, figuring out where, what's pulling the most power in your house. How should we design bike sharing systems or ride sharing systems? So there's a ton of different, how can we predict where the bird migration routes are going to be so that we could turn off the lights when they're coming through and have fewer bird mortality events? Or how should we design wildlife corridors so that grizzly bears can cross highways safely? There's a ton of different possibilities in computational sustainability and beyond.
I see. The possibilities seem endless was the way you talk about them. And we have another question. This question is from Danny, and he's asking, are the students in your lab entirely computer science students?
Right now they are, but some of them are quite interdisciplinarily minded, taking ecology classes and whatnot. I have co-advised a student in the Fisheries and Wildlife Department as well.
Interesting. And then our last question for you is going to be from Dan. And he's asking if your PhD marks your academic degree lineage end, or are you going to pursue another degree later on?
Nope, I'm done. A PhD is typically a terminal degree. Every once in a while, people will get a double PhD, like a double major, or go back and get another degree, but it's quite rare. And I did promise my husband when I finished my PhD that I would not do it again. So no, where I'm at now is an assistant professor pre-tenure. So the next big step for me is to go up for tenure and to have my contributions evaluated and hopefully be awarded tenure, which means a lot of job security in the university and hopefully a promotion to associate professor. And then after that, there's just one more step, which is full professor.
I see. I can't wait for you to achieve that, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much.
Once again, thank you so much for telling us about your job. This was really informative to us and to me and our audience. Now we will be heading into a 5-minute break before introducing our next panelist, so stay tuned for that.
Thanks so much for having me.
of the day. Our second panelist is Mr. Albert Shaheen Jr. Mr. Shaheen is a high school chemistry teacher who incorporates environmental awareness into his curriculum using his private sector experience in the fields of alternative energies and building construction to inform his lessons. He uses chemistry concepts to illustrate the ways his students can work towards solutions. Our second panelist is Mr. Albert Shaheen Jr. Mr. Shaheen is a high school chemistry teacher who incorporates environmental awareness into his curriculum using his...
I closed it. You ready for me?
Yes, go ahead.
All right. Good evening, everyone. And thank you for having me. I really enjoyed seeing Dr. Hutchinson's presentation. I learned a lot. I hope you guys did too. And I am just trying to figure out how to share my screen here without being completely lame. And there we go. All right. I need to... This doesn't normally happen when I'm in class, but it's happening now. Okay. And as you were just told, I'm a high school chemistry teacher, and I have, are you able to see my screen now? Okay. And I won't be discussing much about what Inanna just talked about, high school chemistry teaching and incorporating those concepts. I'm going to talk more about careers in STEM, particularly in relation to my background, which is chemical engineering. And I'm going to start with where I was 51 years ago when the first Earth Day happened. And at that time, there was a lot of awareness being generated. 51 years ago, it was starting to be in the pop culture, as you can see from the song lyric that I have posted there, which was a big hit at the time. There was a lot of awareness, but there wasn't the urgency that there is today. Today, after all of the global impacts that we see, there's urgency. Back then, there were local problems, Love Canal, Palos Verdes EPA Superfund site. But it wasn't until about 20 or 30 years after the 70s, when I was in high school, that we began to see it on a global scale. And now, of course, we're reacting, and the sense of urgency is there, which is good. Unfortunately, it was only there among us young people. So I was about your age, and I know you guys are feeling the same sense of urgency that I felt back then. And the next thing I'm going to jump to, I'm not going to spend as much time on me, but when I graduated from college, chemical engineering majors could go anywhere they wanted to go. We had offers from everywhere. So that was something when I graduated, man, it was time to celebrate. And that's me in the background there in the back trying to keep up. But I knew that I wasn't going to go to a big chemical or oil company. I wanted to do something environment related. And fortunately for me, I had developed a relationship with a mentor, somebody he was a graduate student, and he had gotten a grant at Berkeley, and I had worked for him. And I told him, look, I don't want to go to these big companies. So he introduced me to somebody at the Solar Energy Research Institute. It's now called the National Renewable Energy Labs. And my first job out of college, I conducted cost-benefit analyses of photovoltaic cell technologies. And I learned a few lessons. I'm going to go over some of those lessons that are applicable no matter what job you have, no matter whether you're an engineer, wildlife biologist, or even a non-STEM career. But of course, we're focusing on STEM careers. And so a lot of what I talk about will relate to all of the engineering fields and technology fields, mathematics. All of those can be used in environmental research and remediation, but my knowledge is mostly chemical engineering, so I will be a little bit biased towards that. And I forgot to show you that I'm also the advisor, or one advisor, for our Rabbotics team, Team 7042, and I'm proud of that. All right, so it also didn't hurt that My boss told me, hey, you can go skiing anytime you want, just get your work done. And down at the bottom, and I'll try to do this on a few of my slides, here is the website for the National Renewable Energy Lab. Here is a link to a research paper that is similar to what came out of my work. I tried to find our original research paper and post it. It's too long ago. It was 79 or 80 when that came out. I worked on it in 78, 79. It came out in 80. And I guess we didn't have the internet back then, apparently. So it's not showing up. So I mentioned some of the things that I learned that apply to anybody. And I really encourage you all to look for mentors. If it hadn't been for my mentor, I would not have had that opportunity. I wouldn't have seen it. It was harder to do research on job opportunities than it is now. Now you've got so much access. So make sure that all throughout your career, you're looking for people who are more experienced than you and are stable and can give you some good feedback and give you a constructive criticism. We all need that. And it's hard to assess ourselves. It's always a good idea to have feedback from people who see us objectively, more objectively than we see ourselves. Also, broaden your scope. Look at a wide range of opportunities. And I'm going to talk about different areas of opportunity for careers rather than talking about my teaching, because I think most of you know what teachers do. I hope that what I give you today is something new and that will trigger some, stimulate some thinking on your part. Also, we all have different values and different interests and different long-term plans. So have that in your mind when you're making your decisions. You guys are just deciding which colleges to go to, not even what kinds of jobs to look for. I understand that, but you will be, before you know it, trying to figure out your job prospects and what you want to do. And I didn't say what you want to do with your life, because there will be a lot of changes. You'll probably have several careers like I have. I worked in the public sector, I worked in the private sector, and I now am a teacher. So that experience, as Anana mentioned in the introduction, informs my teaching. All of that experience makes me a better teacher. So some of another lesson that I learned was there's no such thing as a clean and absolutely clean technology. In my research, I discovered that there are a lot of pollutants generated with the production of solar photovoltaic cells. And there are things like mining waste, a lot of which does not get treated. There's a lot of rare earth minerals in those mining tailings that could be recycled, and we're just not doing it because it's not considered cost effective. A lot of air pollution is generated in the manufacture of those cells. They're treated with acids, hydrofluoric acid, and with a strong base, sodium hydroxide, both of which are pollutants. And a gas, one gas that's of particular concern from solar cell manufacturing is called silicon tetrafluoride. It's a very toxic gas, and it is produced in the treatment of the surface of the cells as they're being prepared. So there's a trade-off though. The carbon footprint from solar photovoltaic cells is far less than it is for fossil fuel technologies. But of all of the solar technologies, and I was working at Solar Energy Research Institute, it is now more focused just on the voltaic cells. But back then we were looking at all kinds of solar technologies. Out of all of them, photovoltaic cells were by far the worst polluter, but still far better. And especially once they're up and running, they're not producing the greenhouse gases, although the manufacturer does produce some greenhouse gases. And if you look at today's battery technologies, very similar. And by the way, I've put a link down here that describes in more detail, if you're interested in knowing more about what I'm talking about. I try to provide a few links here and there so you can go into more detail. Today's battery technologies raise similar concerns. We are building batteries like crazy. In fact, I heard somebody on CNBC the other day saying that they're investing in Tesla, not because of the electric car, but because Tesla's battery technology is far and away the better battery technology of any company in the world. So they're invested heavily in Tesla because of the battery technology. And we also, at this time, if you're interested, there's a huge battery generation station, a power plant basically from batteries on an old naval yard up in Monterey County called Moss Landing. And it is generating right now. They've got a 300 megawatt generator online. They have another 100 megawatts coming online. I believe it's in the next 6 months or 10 months. But again, and just like the solar cells, and just like all of our technology, which is used hopefully to reduce pollution, we have a big e-waste problem. And there's an area for you all to think about. One, better batteries. Those are chemical engineering jobs. And all the companies that are making electric vehicles and making batteries, that company up at, and I can't remember the name of it, up at Moss Landing, they are all hiring chemical engineers. They need people to produce better batteries. And we're also going to need, and there isn't enough of this right now, but I'm sure there will be companies or governments getting involved in dealing with e-waste. Right now it's piling up in landfills. So there are some opportunities. There are jobs that haven't even been created yet that you can think about. And they're not just chemical engineering or chemistry background jobs. A lot of engineers can get involved in this. So if you're not thinking about chemical engineering, if that's not interesting to you, as any type of engineer, you can get involved. Another thing I learned was think globally. This is from the United Nations. They have a 17-goal plan for sustainability. So we're all thinking about sustainability, not just reducing greenhouse gases, but if you look at those 17 goals, no poverty, zero hunger, good health, and this is globally now. Keep in mind that no matter what you do, you are a global citizen, you are involved in some technology, but and you may be, it sounds like all of you are going to be interested in that, but your technology may or may not catch on. It may be the greatest technology in the world. But if it doesn't get funded, if the government policy doesn't use it, and a good example is the electric car. 15 years ago, we had electric cars, but the oil companies and the auto companies killed it. There's a movie from 2006 called Who Killed the Electric Car? So we could have been miles ahead or years ahead on the electric car, but government policy allowed the private sector to just continue with the fossil fuel vehicles, gasoline vehicles and diesel. And so whatever you're doing, make yourself aware of not just your technology in your lab or whatever it is, but keep an eye on the pulse of what's going on. Another example is Ireland. My daughter works in Ireland. She worked for the utility regulator. They get their water for free. Their water delivery system is 200 years old, about 50 years past its life expectancy, and they now have lead in their waters, in their drinking water, in all of their water. And the government has tried to pass bills where they would have to pay for their water to upgrade the system. The people keep on voting those bills down, and the government is afraid that they're going to get voted out of office if they force them to pay for their water. So it's bad policy. A great technology does nothing if there's bad policy. So again, be aware of the world around you and how it's impacting your corner of it. So I went through, and again, I came into this thinking that you would want to know something about careers. These are some numbers that I pulled from various places, and they're not, don't take them too hard. You could get offers above these, probably not below these. One that I was really glad to hear Dr. Hutchinson talk about was the modeling and predicting mathematics, and also the computer simulations that they're doing, because I was trying to figure out, okay, how do those really fit into the environment? She just answered that for me, so it was great. The biggest area where we're going to be able to make progress is AI. And that AI number, 77,000 and up, if you're top-notch in AI, you're going to make a lot more than that. If you're a chemical engineer, it won't be long before you're making what you see on the screen there. One that's really cool is material science. Those could be physicists if you went into physics, or if you went into chemistry or chemical engineering. And material scientists are typically lab rats, and they're developing all the new materials that we use. And we're trying to find better materials that use less fossil fuel, making less plastic. And so that's another area that you can look around. A couple of big companies, BASF and LyondellBasell, are companies you've probably never heard of. They're huge. You hear about Exxon, you hear about the oil companies, you hear about Dow Chemical. You don't hear about those materials companies. And if I've mentioned anything that you want more information on, just go ahead and ask. I'll answer it at the end. And then there are now a lot of environmental engineering degrees. And that's great. But I think that you can be an environmental engineer. I know you can with just about any, or an environmental worker with just about any one of those degrees. It would be much easier to go from being, say, a chemical engineer to an environmental engineer than it would be to go the other way. An environmental engineer has a broader base of education, a wider variety of courses. In all of the others, chemical engineering, aeronautical, civil, electrical, you focus on your area. And you can get certified, you can get the environmental afterwards with less effort than it would take for an environmental engineer to go back and get one of the other specialties should they want it. Okay, so where do you look for jobs? Actually, if you're chemical engineering and chemistry, they look for you. And these are the areas that I didn't want to work in because they're environmentally not friendly. And so that's kind of against what we're talking about right now. However, a lot of these companies now are out there calling themselves green, and some of them are actually putting the money into research divisions that focus on environmental remediation, on polluting less. They're probably not doing it as quickly as we would like, but everybody is now starting to recognize that it's going to cost us trillions if we don't fix this now. And so even those old companies that I didn't want to work for have environmental research divisions. Not all, but you can always research, call, ask, and find out, hey, I want to work for your research lab, even though you guys stink up the planet. And so this just follows up on what I just said. There are all kinds of companies out there billing themselves now as green. And there are also, if you notice, NASA is on there. There are a lot of government agencies that are also working on being environmentally friendly. Some of these aren't relevant to what we're talking about now, but it's not just a fad. This isn't going away. These companies are starting to get serious as they recognize what needs to be done. Here is another area where you can look for careers as any kind of an engineer. I'm more focused on energy. That's what I did. I worked at the Solar Energy Research Institute. And these are all the national labs under DOE and the US government labs. Some of them are focused specifically on energy. You see on the right, some of them, the famous ones, Los Alamos and Sandia, where the first nuclear tests were done. These are all possibilities for getting hired. And in all of these, just like in the previous, you would start out at a junior level in a research lab, probably with PhDs overseeing you. And that is just the greatest training for you to go on, like Dr. Hutchinson, to get your advanced degree, like she was talking about. That's where you get the foundational knowledge, and then you start seeing things that you might like to study. I don't recommend going straight from undergrad to doctoral or master's. I recommend getting some work experience. And with an engineering or a STEM degree, so I shouldn't be saying engineering, I should be saying STEM, because some of your math, computer, technology. But you will be able to get out there and get work, and you can probably go to college at the same time, take classes, and at least start focusing yourself. And number 3, up on the screen there is where I worked. Not too proud there. Here's just another taste of some of the agencies that have hired chemical engineers, and they don't just hire chemical engineers. They hire all kinds of engineers, and you can see the average pay. So as a starting out junior researcher, you're below that. If you go to the executive suite, you will make more than that. So this is the median, I believe. It says average, and this is where I found this table, and you can find all kinds of engineering and technology career tables like this. There are also nonprofit groups, and all of you are watching this because you're interested in the environment, at least I believe that. And so these I wouldn't say is where you would go initially, but they're good to develop contacts with, and see if at some point, you know, as you get older and you start developing your expertise, you're going to want to pass it on to the next generation. And there are different places where you can donate your time, expertise, even money if you've done well. And some of them you can find competitive salaries, but I would not recommend starting here. Certainly you can research them and see what they have. And again, here's just one site that rates down at the bottom there, a link to a site. So I'm going to share this with Dawn. It's Dawn. I've updated it since 4 o'clock when I sent you mine. So everybody will have access to this. I hope. I'm going to put it on the drive. I'll send you the link. All right. Another place to look, state, county, and city agencies. They're all, and again, these are public sector jobs. You have a fixed pay scale, but you can get great experience in these places too. If you want lab work, this is probably not the place to go, although some of them do have some good labs. And public utilities, of course, they are hiring. In fact, a friend of mine, Ron Litzinger, who was also a chemical engineer, started at Edison and worked his way to the top. He was the president of Edison for a few years and retired from there. So in all of these, and the other engineers that work at Edison have also been, there have been other types of engineers who have been presidents of Edison. I just keep thinking about chemical because that's me. So as you're trying to make your decisions and as you're thinking about STEM and the environment and your future, consider what your long-term life interests are. You can move. Anybody who has a degree and has gained the experience in a STEM career is considered a top-notch problem solver, and you can move into other areas. One of my college roommates, chemical engineer, became an attorney, ended up working for Clorox and working on patent law. But there was also, Clorox was also doing some work on environmental. They have an environmental research lab. I mentioned earlier, policy. If you want to really have an impact, at some point being involved in that policy-making process, as an economist, one of my mentors and bosses at Solar Energy Research Institute became an economist, formed his own research company, and became an expert witness as well. In his specialty was nuclear, and he was a physicist, not a chemical engineer, and he became an economist. He got a PhD in economics after getting his bachelor's in physics. And of course, just having that foundation and a few years experience, keep your eyes open. There are so many options, so many opportunities for you. And also some of you I know have an entrepreneurial spirit, and you have the skills to go on. And it doesn't have to be environmental. It could be any kind of company that you want to create. One person I know just recently started his own business with a technology where he has these little robots go out and clean the solar cells on the roofs of people's houses. He has these little cleaners that go out there and do it remotely, robotically, so that they don't have people climbing around on their roofs. So I hope that I have given you some information that's useful to you. And that's it for what I have to say. So I can stop sharing here. At least I used to know how to be able to stop sharing. Okay, there we go.
Thank you so much for your presentation. That was really helpful for just a general overview of not only chemical engineering, but where you can go from it. So once again, our YouTube chat will be open for questions. So please type any and all questions you have in the chat, and I will monitor them to ask Mr. Shaheen. So before we get questions in the chat, again, reverting to one of the questions on our pre-made list, you mentioned mentors and finding someone to help guide you, but how do you get connections that eventually get you job offers and experience?
Well, you need to be proactive and a little bit lucky, but when I was at Berkeley, I ended up working for a project which was run by the person who became my mentor. And I just asked him for help. And basically, that's what you're doing. It's asking people who are a level or two above you in terms of their skill and knowledge for help. So you need to reach out. That's really what it comes down to. And when you're in college, you'll be meeting TAs. Because TAs will teach most of your classes for those first couple of years. Through clubs, you'll meet people who are further advanced. I participated in grants. I would look for grant opportunities where they were hiring. And that's how I ended up meeting Alan Meyer, my mentor. And then I just developed that relationship. So look for extracurricular involvement. And that is where you'll start meeting those people. There are engineering, fraternities. There are engineering organizations. Not fraternities, but you know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. And now we have a question from our audience. This is from Don, and he's asking, what were the companies you talked about for material sciences?
Okay. Do you want me to type that right into the chat there so you can read them? Or do you want me to just...
I think that would be nice and convenient. And if you could elaborate while typing, that would be great as well.
For me to do two things at once is pretty scary. See if I got it right. Oh, nothing came out. Okay. So these are companies that take raw materials or take products and use technology to improve those products, to improve the materials that go into those products. They're basically material science. They're materials producers and they sell their materials to manufacturers. And so they're constantly researching how to make better materials. Think of your carbon fiber bike wheels. And now that probably came from government. So that's the other cool thing about government is you get all kinds of exposure to. Government spends money where private capital won't, because government doesn't have to make money. They can research all kinds of cool things. And if you get lucky, you get into a lab that's doing that. But BASF and LyondellBasell are two companies that are involved in developing state-of-the-art materials for manufacturers. So they're constantly trying to improve the materials that we use. And BASF and LyondellBasell have both made materials that are in practically everything you use. So just look at them online and you'll see what they do.
Okay, on to another question. This is also from our pre-made survey. And this question is, what did you like the most about your job and what was your least favorite part of it?
Okay, so are we talking about, I guess, the job in research? What I loved about research was I worked with a great team, that helped, but also just all of the data that I had access to as part of a government research lab that I would have had to pay, hundreds of thousands of dollars for. And I found things that pretty much didn't have much to do with what I was learning, but it was like the door was open. You could research anything. One of the funny things I found was and I called the people in Riverside, the first study on the pollution effects on citrus was done in Riverside and back in the 60s. So with the orange groves, so there used to be orange groves out there. And I called and I ended up talking with the parent of one of my college roommates. I didn't even know she worked there. But anyway, my favorite part was all of the material information available to me. And also, even if you were in a private lab or whatever it is, you have all of this wide open place of just exploration. For me, it's all about exploration. And if you're in a lab where you're being directed by a PhD to create something, you just learn so much cool stuff. It's never ending if you're curious like I am. My least favorite, I don't know. Like any job, there are days when you just don't want to go. That didn't happen to me there because if you noticed on that one slide, my boss told me, you just go skiing anytime you want, but you better meet the deadline. And so that was kind of nice. I guess, in any job, you're going to deal with people who are difficult. And so you learn to deal with people. Even that, you find a way. I loved what I did. So it's hard to think of something I didn't like.
That's wonderful to hear. Now we have a question from Danny from our audience, and he says, as someone interested in chemical engineering, I have been looking a lot at the coursework for the major. Can you talk about the courses and topics you studied as a chemical engineering student?
Okay. This was 1974, so I've got to think back. But the first couple of years that were the general chemistry, quantitative analysis, physics, physical chemistry, organic chemistry. It's when you got to the upper classes, then thermodynamics, there was a ton of physics, math. You had to take all kinds of math up through differential equations and beyond. Then in my last couple of years, I don't know if it's still this way. It's been years since I was in college, but you could start focusing your major on what you wanted to do. So there were industrial applications, there were research classes where you applied basically what you had learned in those first couple of years. But the first couple of years, you're going to take the basic stuff, what I mentioned there. I don't know if that answers your question. If not, I'll try and take another crack at it.
All right. In the meantime, we have a question from Don, and he asks, how did you achieve a good work-life balance?
Well, that's still a challenge. There will be those times, especially when I had small children. I was relating when Dr. Hutchinson was talking about taking a kid to the doctor, but mine are grown. And originally I didn't have kids, so that wasn't too hard. It was the years when I had children and I was working, and then I really didn't have. I worked long hours, and there will come times when you don't have the balance you would like, and then it's a matter of focusing on your health, mentally and physically, making sure that even though you might be overloaded and stressed, that you maintain relationships, that you stay in touch, and that also sometimes you just have to take that downtime. Sometimes you just have to say, hey, I'm done, I'm burned. But we all go through phases of burnout. There are times when, and especially in today's world, your bosses will talk about work-life balance, but honestly, a lot of people don't have it. And you have to kind of take that back. You have to be proactive again. But again, there will be a few years in there where that's awfully tough. It's not going to always be perfect, that's for sure.
Let's see, that's a really important thing for us to see was our future careers,
Right.
Considering the time we have in them. Now we have a question from Altea who's asking about bouncing between careers and combining interests, like you mentioned. And she's asking, how can one jump between or combine multiple passions from your experience?
Well, that's a really good one. Yeah, because you know how Dr. Hutchinson talked about, hers was a linear path. Mine is about as zigzagged as you can get. Mine's about as nonlinear as you can get. So I was at Solar Energy Research Institute, and as much as I loved it, I had an opportunity here in California in the construction field, and I jumped at that. It was a lot more money, number one, because as a junior researcher in a government lab, you're not paid all that much. And I grew up in a real estate and construction family. My grandfather and uncles built a lot of Compton. If you go down Alondra Boulevard, almost every building on Alondra between Atlantic and Long Beach Boulevard was built by my family. And so I loved construction. And I was also really interested in finding ways to improve the quality of the buildings. And again, you run into walls because people don't want to pay for, long-term. A lot of the developers don't want to pay for something that's going to make the building sustainable when they're just going to sell it. And so they're not thinking about the environment, they're thinking about the profit. That's always a push and pull. But it's you're asking kind of the same thing that Dawn asked. I do have a lot of interests, and I was able to change careers. And then in the next career change for me, though, was forced. I had worked in the construction industry till the mid-90s, and the market went completely south. And by then I had 2 small children. I had to put a roof over their heads. And that's when I went into teaching, and I really loved teaching. At first it was kind of scary, and it turned out that my real passion was teaching. I loved construction. I loved doing the research, but I really love working with students and seeing them light up and get excited and interested. And that happens a lot in robotics. Sometimes in chemistry class, not so much, but you find ways. But you sometimes can't marry your passion to your career, especially if you have a lot of interests. So make sure that what you do choose at least kind of resonates with your values, and then you will at least like your work, if not love it, and then find a way to indulge your other passions. That's that work-life balancing that Dawn was talking about. You always want to have a balance in terms of having avocations. I know a lot of you are musical, you like sports. Make sure you have something that really gets your juices flowing outside of work, so you come back to work pumped up. That's about the best way I can answer that one.
Okay, thank you so much for that. And one final question before we end our career panel. And it's, what do you know now that you wish you knew in high school that could enlighten some of our audience members?
I think for me, I didn't have a lot of confidence in high school. And for me, the most important thing that I wish I had known was to be honest about that, to be open and say, hey, I don't know what I'm doing. I need help. And to reach out to other people and say, hey, can you help? I was always I've got to do this on my own. I have to be my own person. So I wish I had been better at networking, because networking is really your strength. The hardest material, there are harder ones, but diamonds are a network solid, and it's not by accident that they are resilient. So networking is key, and not being afraid to say, hey, I don't know something. For me, that was just death. I couldn't admit that I didn't know something. So be open to other people and to forming relationships. And I've seen in robotics, I think, is everybody here in robotics, or are there other people not in robotics?
I'm not sure if everyone in the audience is from robotics, but there are a lot of our members in the audience.
So I've seen a lot of you able to network and really, but get outside yourself. I was kind of a shy, not very good at networking kind of person. You got to get past that.
Okay. Thank you so much for giving your time on a Saturday evening to come tell us about what you do. It has been really informative for me, and I'm sure our audience. So once again, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. And now, before we end our first night of career panels, I would like to thank all of you guys in our audience for watching. I hope that you learned as much as I did about the future careers that can apply a passion for the environment to STEM. Before we end the first day, though, can you please fill out the feedback survey that will be pasted in the chat, and let us know what you thought about our event and what you would like to see for our future events. Once again, thank you to our panelists, without whom this career panel wouldn't have been possible. And please note that tomorrow we will be hosting 2 more panelists at the same time, 5:30 on our YouTube channel. Have a great night, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Goodbye.